Being is an extremely broad concept encompassing objective and subjective features of reality and existence. Anything that partakes in being is also called the being, though often this use is limited to entities that have subjectivity. So broad a notion has inevitably been elusive and controversial in the history of philosophy, beginning in Western philosophy with attempts among the pre-Socratics to deploy it intelligibly. As an example of efforts in recent times, Martin Heidegger adopted German terms like Dasein to articulate the topic. Several modern approaches build on such continental European exemplars as Heidegger, and apply metaphysical results to the understanding of human psychology and the human condition generally. By contrast, in mainstream analytical philosophy the topic is more confined to abstract investigation. In the work of such influential theorists as W. V.O. Quine, to name one of many, one most fundamental question that continues to exercise philosophers is put by William James. How comes the world to be here at all instead of the non-entity which might be imagined in its place? From nothing to being there is no logical bridge, the substantial being. And the substance theorists. The deficit of such a bridge was first encountered in history by the pre-Socratic philosophers during the process of evolving a classification of all beings. Aristotle, who wrote after the pre-Socratics, applies the term category to 10 highest-level classes. They comprise 1 category of substance existing independently and 9 categories of accidents, which can only exist in something else. In Aristotle, substances are to be clarified by stating their definition, a note expressing a larger class followed by further notes expressing specific differences within the class. The substance so defined was a species. For example, the species, man, may be defined as an animal that is rational. As the difference is potential within the genus, that is, an animal may or may not be rational, the difference is not identical to, and may be distinct from, the genus. Applied to being, the system fails to arrive at a definition for the simple reason that no difference can be found. The species, the genus, and the difference are all equally being. A being is a being that is being. The genus cannot be nothing because nothing is not a class of everything. The trivial solution that being is being added to nothing is only a tautology. Being is being. There is no simpler intermediary between being and non-being that explains and classifies being. Pre-Socratic reaction to this deficit was varied. As substance theorists they accepted a priori the hypothesis that appearances are deceiving, that reality is to be reached through reasoning. Parmenides reasoned that if everything is identical to being and being is a category of the same thing then there can be neither differences between things nor any change. To be different, or to change, would amount to becoming or being non-being, that is, not existing. Therefore, being is a homogeneous and non-differentiated sphere and the appearance of beings is illusory. Heraclitus, on the other hand, foreshadowed modern thought by denying existence. Reality does not exist, it flows, and beings are an illusion upon the flow. Aristotle knew of this tradition when he began his metaphysics, and had already drawn his own conclusion, which he presented under the guise of asking what being is. And indeed, the question which was raised of old is raised now and always, and is always the subject of doubt, viz., what being is just the question, what is substance? For it is this that some assert to be one, others more than one, and that some assert to be limited in number, others unlimited. Nothing, then, which is not a species of a genus will have an essence, only species will have it. Being, however, for Aristotle, is not a genus. Aristotle's theory of actimpotency. One might expect a solution to follow from such certain language, but none does. Instead, Aristotle launches into a rephrasing of the problem, the theory of actimpotency. In the definition of man as a two-legged animal, Aristotle presumes that two-legged and animal are parts of other beings, but as far as man is concerned, are only potentially man. At the point where they are united into a single being, man, the being, becomes actual, or real. Unity is the basis of actuality. being is being combined and one, and not being is being not combined but more than one. Actuality has taken the place of existence. But Aristotle is no longer seeking to know what the actual is, he accepts it without question as something generated from the potential. He has found a half-being, or a pre-being, the potency, which is fully being as part of some other substance. Substances, in Aristotle, unite what they actually are now with everything they might become, the transcendental being. Some of Thomas Aquinas' propositions were reputedly condemned by the local bishop of Paris in 1270 and 1277. But his dedication to the use of philosophy to elucidate theology was so thorough that he was proclaimed a doctor of the Church in 1568. Those who adopt it are called Thomists. Thomistic analogical predication of being in a single sentence, parallel to Aristotle's statement asserting that being is substance. St. Thomas pushes away from the Aristotelian doctrine. Being is not a genus, since it is not predicated univocally, but only analogically. His term for analogy is Latin analogia. In the categorical classification of all beings, all substances are partly the same. Man and chimpanzee are both animals, and the animal part in man is the same as the animal part in chimpanzee. Most fundamentally, all substances are matter, a theme taken up by science, which postulated one or more matters, such as earth, air, fire or water. In today's chemistry, the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen and nitrogen in a chimpanzee are identical to the same elements in a man. The original text reads, although equivocal predications must be reduced to univocal, still in actions, the non-univocal agent must precede the univocal agent. For the non-univocal agent is the universal cause of the whole species. As for instance, the sun is the cause of the generation of all men, whereas the univocal agent is not the universal efficient cause of the whole species, but is a particular cause of this individual which it places under the species by way of participation. Therefore the universal cause of the whole species is not an univocal agent, and the universal cause comes before the particular cause. But this universal agent, whilst it is not univocal, nevertheless is not altogether equivocal, otherwise it could not produce its own likeness. But rather it is to be called an analogical agent, as all univocal predications are reduced to one first non-univocal analogical predication, which is being. If substance is the highest category and there is no substance, being, then the unity perceived in all beings by virtue of their existing must be viewed in another way. St. Thomas chose the analogy, all beings are like, or analogous to, each other in existing. This comparison is the basis of his analogy of being. The analogy is said of being in many different ways, but the key to it is the real distinction between existence and essence. Existence is the principle that gives reality to an essence not the same in any way as the existence. If things having essences are real, and it is not of their essence to be, then the reality of these things must be found in some principle other than their essence. Substance can be real or not. What makes an individual substance, a man, a tree, a planet, real is a distinct act, a to be, which actuates its unity. An analogy of proportion is therefore possible. Essence is related to existence as potency is related to act. Existences are not things, they do not themselves exist. They lend themselves to essences, which do not intrinsically have them. They have no nature. An existence receives its nature from the essence it actuates. Existence is not being, it gives being. Here a customary phrase is used. Existence is a principle of being, not a previous source, but one which is continually in effect. The stage is set for the concept of God as the cause of all existence, who, as the Almighty, holds everything actual without reason or explanation as an act purely of will. The Transcendentals Aristotle's classificatory scheme had included the 5 predicables, or characteristics that might be predicated of a substance. One of these was the property, an essential universal true of the species, but not in the definition. pointing out that predicables are predicated univocally of substances, that is, they refer to the same thing found in each instance. St. Thomas argued that whatever can be said about being is not univocal, because all beings are unique, each actuated by a unique existence. It is the analogous possession of an existence that allows them to be identified as being. Therefore, being is an analogous predication. Whatever can be predicated of all things is universal-like but not universal, category-like but not a category. St. Thomas called them the transcendentia, transcendentals, because they climb above the categories, just as being climbs above substance. Later academics also referred to them as the properties of being. The number is generally 3 or 4. Being in Islamic philosophy. The nature of being has also been debated and explored in Islamic philosophy, notably by Ibn Sina, Suhrawardi, and Mullah Sadra. A modern linguistic approach which notices that Persian language has exceptionally developed two kinds of is, i.e., Aston Hast examines the linguistic properties of the two lexemes in the first place, then evaluates how the statements made by other languages with regard to being can stand the test of Persian frame of reference. It is noticed that the original language of the source, e.g., Greek, German and English, has only one word for two concepts. Aston Hast, or, like Arabic, has no word at all for either word. It therefore exploits the Persian Hast versus Ast to address both Western and Islamic ontological arguments on being and existence. This linguistic method shows the scope of confusion created by languages which cannot differentiate between existential be and copular. It manifests, for instance, that the main theme of Heidegger's being in time is asti rather than hasty. When, in the beginning of his book, Heidegger claims that people always talk about existence in their everyday language, without knowing what it means, the example he resorts to is, "The sky is blue," which in Persian can be only translated with the use of the copular ast, and says nothing about being or existence. In the same manner, the linguistic method addresses the ontological works written in Arabic. Since Arabic, like Latin in Europe, had become the official language of philosophical and scientific works in the so-called Islamic world, the early Persian or Arab philosophers had difficulty discussing being or existence, since the Arabic language, like other Semitic languages, had no verb for either predicative be, or existential be. So if you try to translate the aforementioned Heidegger's example into Arabic, it appears as with no linking, is, to be a sign of, existential statement. To overcome the problem, when translating the ancient Greek philosophy, certain words were coined, like I-Sefer, eyes. Eventually the Arabic verb wajada prevailed, since it was thought that whatever is existent, is to be found in the world. Hence existence or being was called wujud, greater than appear, greater than exist. Now, with regard to the fact that Persian, as the mother tongue of both Avicenna and Sadra, was in conflict with either Greek or Arabic in this regard, these philosophers should have been warned implicitly by their mother tongue not to confuse two kinds of linguistic beings. In fact, when analyzed thoroughly, copular, or Persian ast indicates an ever-moving chain of relations with no fixed entity to hold on to. Therefore, the whole reality or what we see as existence resembles an ever-changing world of asti flowing in time and space. On the other hand, while Persian ast can be considered as the third-person singular of the verb to be, there is no verb but an arbitrary one supporting hast has neither future nor past tense and nor a negative form of its own. Hast is just a single untouchable lexeme. It needs no other linguistic element to be complete. In fact, any manipulation of the arbitrary verb, e.g., its conjugation, turns hast back into a copular. Eventually, from such linguistic analyses, it appears that while asti would resemble the world of Heraclitus, hasty would rather approach as a metaphysical concept resembling the Parmenides' interpretation of existence. In this regard, Avicenna, who was a firm follower of Aristotle, could not accept either Heraclitianism nor Parmenidean monist immovable existence. To solve the contradiction, it so appeared to philosophers of Islamic world that Aristotle considered the core of existence as a fixed constant, while its facade was prone to change. To translate such a philosophical image into Persian, it is like having Hasty as a unique constant core covered by Asti as a cloud of ever-changing relationships. It is clear that the Persian language deconstructs such a composite as a sheer mirage, since it is not clear how to link the interior core with the exterior shell. Furthermore, Has cannot be linked to anything but itself. The argument has a theological echoes as well. Assuming that God is the existence beyond time and space, a question is raised by philosophers of the Islamic world as how he, as a transcendental existence, may ever create or contact a world of isness in space-time. However, Avicenna, who was more philosopher than theologian, followed the same line of argumentation as that of his ancient master, Aristotle, and tried to reconcile between Ast and Hast by considering the latter as higher order of existence than the former. It is like a hierarchical order of existence. It was a philosophical Tower of Babel that the restriction of his own mother tongue would not allow to be built. But he could maneuver in Arabic by giving the two concepts the same name wujud, although with different attributes. So, implicitly, Asti appears as Mumkin al-Wujud, and Hasty as Wajib al-Wujud. On the other hand, centuries later, Sadra chose a more radical route, by inclining towards the reality of Asti, as the true mode of existence, and tried to get rid of the concept of Hasty. Thus, in his philosophy, the universal movement penetrates deep into the Aristotelian substance, essence, in unison with changing accident. He called this deep existential change harikati jofari. It is obvious that in such a changing existence, the whole world has to go through instantaneous annihilation and recreation incessantly, while as Avicenna had predicted in his remarks on nature, such a universal change or substantial movement would eventually entail the shortening and lengthening of time as well, which has never been observed. This logical objection, which was made on Aristotle's argumentation, could not be answered in the ancient times or medieval age. But now it does not sound contradictory to the real nature of time, so by a reverse argument, a philosopher may indeed deduce that everything is changing even in the deepest core of being.